In late October of 2008, a 36-year-old mother of three failed to show for a meeting at her son's school at 3:15 p.m. that was scheduled to plan the class Halloween party, and she appeared to have vanished without a trace. Her dark blue Dodge Caravan would be found 2 days later by a hunter, abandoned on a trail past a gas well on Courtright Road in Boostai, about 2 miles from her New York home. What happened to her still remains a mystery to this day. And as I researched her story, I kept finding more stories of other missing New York mothers. I'm Amanda Morgan, and this is New York's Dark Side. When I started researching this episode, I quickly got invested because what I didn't expect to find was so many stories of missing mothers in the same sort of area, and the story of a Jane Doe who has yet to be identified. For those of you that actually know me personally, this week has been so bittersweet. I had the privilege and the pride to watch my son graduate from high school this week, ending one chapter of life and preparing to move on to the next, even though I was joking with my dad yesterday that it seems like every day the contents of that next chapter change. I know that he will figure out a path. The women that we'll talk about today did not have that same privilege that I did. Their children did not get the joy of their mother cheering them on at so many of their lives' next milestones. Instead, they're left with a mystery as to what happened to them. And I'm left feeling the heartache of their story while adding additional names to my list for future coverage in upcoming episodes. These are the stories of Corrie Anderson, Marquita Mull, Patricia Laemmerhirt, the still unidentified Chautauqua Rails to Trails Jane Doe. Let's dive right in. Tuesday, October 28th, 2008, started out like a normal day for Boostai, New York resident, 36-year-old Corrie Anderson. Corrie worked part-time in the library at Jamestown Community College. On this day, she worked her shift at the library and got done at her usual time around noon. After work, Corrie stopped to see her boyfriend, who worked at the Lake County Dodge car dealership that was on Washington Street at the time, and she left there between 1 and 1:10 p.m. After leaving the car dealership, Corrie stopped back at her house on Wellman Road in the town of Boostai. What happened to Corrie from there is a mystery. When Corrie failed to show up at her meeting at the school and didn't pick up any of her children, the family notified police right away. This was something that was completely out of character for Corrie. She was very devoted to her children. She would not just not pick them up. She would not just not attend a meeting. There was also a significant amount of concern from Corrie's family that her disappearance may be a result of her estranged husband, Kenneth, whom Corrie had an order of protection in place from. Corrie and Kenneth had met in 2000, and they married shortly afterwards. Corrie had already had 2 daughters from a previous marriage, and in 2001, Corrie and Kenneth would welcome a son. They were married for 5 years before they separated, and they separated because Corrie learned that he was still married to his previous wife. Kenneth was not at all happy about the separation, and he continued to pursue her, trying to reconcile. But he did it in such a not okay way. He would go so far as to put a GPS tracker on her car, which totally not stalkerish at all. I'm joking. Anyway, this is when Corrie sought the order of protection against Kenneth, which he did violate in 2007, the year before Corrie's disappearance. Corrie had sent an email to a relative prior to her disappearance in October describing how Kenneth would try to make her feel insane and that she felt like he was trying to drag his feet on getting the terms of their separation worked out because he had, quote, control issues. After calling the police to report Corrie missing, her family would go to her home. And this solidified to them that something was very wrong when they found that her van was missing, but also that there was a shoe that she had been wearing earlier that day lying at the bottom of the staircase. And they couldn't find the other shoe in the house. It was just gone. It seems like from the start, law enforcement took Corrie's disappearance very seriously. Members of the Chautauqua County Sheriffs worked with both New York State Police and all the other law enforcement agencies in the county to search for Corrie. They searched on foot and they searched by air. They used ATVs, horses, helicopters, search dogs, but Corrie seems to have just vanished without a trace. 2 days later, Thursday, October 30th, a hunter would find Corrie's 2005 dark blue Dodge Caravan abandoned on a trail just past a gas well on Courtright Road. The van was well out of sight from the road, but its location was actually not far from Corrie's house, only about a mile or two away. The van was taken to a lab in Batavia, New York, to search for any evidence that might help track down what happened to Corrie. They continued to search the area around where the van was found. However, the weather, being late October into early November, would not cooperate with them very long, and the search had to be called off as New York weather started to dump snow on the region. After Corrie's van was found, law enforcement officials would question Corrie's estranged husband, Kenneth, and they would also conduct a search of his home. But if any evidence was pulled from his home at that point, it doesn't appear that it was ever released publicly. Fast forward to 2016. So we've gone 8 years with nothing. No sign of Corrie, nothing further in the case. In 2016, police would receive a reliable tip that sent them back to do another search of the area where Corrie's van was found. And they launched another large-scale search, including the use of search dogs again. They used metal detectors. And the weather at this point was vastly improved from their prior search attempts in the area. And they felt that it was because of this that they located and secured some further evidence, including Corrie's keys and her missing shoe. Later that year, in November of 2016, Kenneth Anderson would be accused of abducting his current wife at the time from New York and sexually assaulting her. In an article by Spectrum News, Kenneth and his wife were found at a Days Inn in Richmond, Kentucky, several states away, by police. His wife at the time had a restraining order against him, just like Corrie had, and he, just like he had with Corrie, had violated it. His wife would report to police that Kenneth had assaulted her and threatened to lock her in a basement and take her children. He was charged with kidnapping, domestic violence, and first-degree sexual assault. With this news, New York State Police began working with law enforcement officials in Kentucky to see if any potential new leads would come from this arrest. Much like Corrie had described in the email to a relative before her disappearance, Kenneth's wife, whose name was not released, in 2016 would describe Kenneth as extremely controlling and that he had a history of assaulting her. Kenneth was held in a Madison County detention center. His current wife would return to where she lived in New York and had plans to meet with New York State Police soon after returning, according to an article in HuffPost. While Kenneth Anderson was and still is considered a person of interest in Corrie Anderson's case, he's still not been charged to this day. In a September 2019 episode of Unsolved, senior investigator on Corrie Anderson's case, Jeremy Smith, would state in an interview that while the case was currently cold, it may not stay that way for long. as investigators had DNA evidence from Corrie's house and the Dodge Caravan. Investigator Smith had met with the Chautauqua County District Attorney Patrick Swanson to try to work on using the new DNA technology available to try to help separate the DNA that was found in the van and house to try to pin it down to direct individuals. On September 26, 2021, Corrie's mother, Vicki, would get a call that human remains had been found off the trail in Chautauqua Rails to Trails in Portland, New York by hikers in a shallow grave. Vicki would later give a statement to Spectrum News that she had been driving at the time that she received the phone call about the remains, and she had to pull over, and she just cried because of the emotions of wondering if this time would be the time that they finally found Corrie and all the memories that came to the surface along with that. And I just can't imagine not having answers for this long and not knowing. It's incredibly, incredibly heartbreaking. And not long after receiving that call, she heard that investigators had actually found a second set of human remains the following day as they were conducting a grid search from the area the first set of remains was found. There were concerns that the second set of remains was likely too new to be Corrie, and the first set was very likely too old to be Corrie. They were found only about 10 yards from each other, and according to an article in the Jamestown Port Journal, there had been no attempts at all to try to bury the second victim. She was just left in the open. Unfortunately, the thought that they were not Corrie would prove to be true. The second set of remains that had been found would later be identified as 50-year-old Marquita Mull by the Mercyhurst Forensic Anthropology Department based on her dental records. Marquita had been a resident of Buffalo, New York, and was last seen on June 15, 2001 in Buffalo, 60 miles from where she would eventually be found. She was reported missing to authorities in Buffalo on July 18th. Investigators thought that because Marquita was a resident of Erie County, they thought it was possible that the other victim was also from Erie County, though there is no concrete evidence at all that the two cases are connected at this point. Marquita's family would tell WKBW that Marquita had no known connections to the area of where her body was found, and that they believed that someone had potentially killed her in Buffalo, where she went missing, and then dumped her body in Portland. Marquita did not have a car, and it made that incredibly unlikely that she would have been able to get to Portland of her own accord. Marquita was a mother of 3, just like Corrie. Her sister would state in the same article that while Marquita struggled with mental illness, she did a lot to help other people that were struggling, including helping to feed people with unstable housing, and she did other things to help volunteer in her community. Wendy, Marquita's sister, would go on to state something that I just found to be such a very powerful reminder in regards to anyone struggling with mental health issues. And she said, quote, "Don't judge her by her depression. When she did act out, when she did have problems, when she didn't know how to control it, because depression is a mean thing," end quote. It's just so important to remember that there is a person underneath what is going on with them. There is a person in there that is truly struggling. And this country, the state, so many counties just really, really struggle with access to mental health care. There is such a stigma around seeking mental health care, and it's debilitating to this country, I think. It's debilitating to the person that can be struggling with it. People don't want to struggle with mental health problems. They don't want to be depressed. They don't want what's happening to them. It's an illness. It's not a choice. And we could do so much better as a state, as a nation, to build access to mental health care. I could go on. I really could. I've worked with so many people struggling with mental health care, and it is hard. It's hard for healthcare workers to sometimes deal with the behaviors that come along with mental health issues. But it's first and foremost so hard on the person that's actually struggling with them. That's all I have to say. The first set of remains was described to be that as an unidentified female victim between 15 and 35 years old. She was between 4'11" and 5'7" inches. They were able to use dental records to determine that the woman was not Corrie Andrews or that of several other missing women in the state. I've shared a flyer on the show's webpage for this episode, and I'll share it on social media as well. That was created by the group Western New York Missing and Unidentified. I'm linking their page in the show notes as well. But they are an organization that helps in trying to locate missing and unidentified peoples. So I really highly recommend checking them out. I follow them. It's just a great organization to try to follow. According to a December 2022 article in the Times Observer, a name that had cropped up as a potential match to the Jane Doe was Patricia Laemmerhirt, who had been reported missing in April of 1976, like almost 50 years earlier, by her husband. However, the shirt that was found with the remains likely rules that out as a possibility. The striped shirt that was found with her was determined to be likely sold in the early 1990s, which was what ruled her out, but gave law enforcement a potential timeline for how long the Jane Doe may have been buried in the area. It's uncertain if Marquita Mull's body being discovered in the area of the Jane Doe connects the two cases in any way, like I said. But in January of 2022, it was announced that the remains of the Jane Doe had been sent to the FBI for more advanced DNA testing, the results of which have not been publicly released as of this episode. If you have any information on Marquita Mull's disappearance or the Rails to Trails Jane Doe, please reach out to investigator Jacob Staley of the Chautauqua County Sheriff's Office at 716-753-4973, or you can send an email to unsolvedchautauqua@sheriff.us. And I'll have that contact information in the show notes. Marquita Mull's family wants answers as to what happened to her. There is a Justice for Marquita Mull Facebook page, which I've also linked in the show notes and on the webpage for this episode, and I'll be sharing that on my social medias as well. Back to Patricia Laemmerhirt, the woman that was potentially thought to be the Jane Doe early on. She was only 27 when she disappeared back in 1976, and what happened to her still remains a complete mystery to this day. Patricia lived in Westfield, New York with her husband Ernest Laemmerhirt Jr. on North Portage Street. In March of 1976, she told her brother Albert Sam that there was some marital issues occurring between her and Ernest, and Albert actually came to retrieve her from Westfield and took her home to stay with their mother in Dunkirk, New York. She would later return to Westfield to stay with Ernest. On April 5th, Ernest would call Patricia's brother Albert, asking if he had seen Patricia, stating that Ernest had not seen or heard from her since about 2 days earlier. Suspicious of Ernest's story, Albert would actually bring another relative and would come break into the Laemmerhirt home when Ernest was away to look for clues to her disappearance. And he found that all of her belongings, including all of her clothes, were gone. He would later tell the Buffalo News that, quote, there was not one sign that my sister had ever lived there. Her drawers were all empty, no clothes, nothing, end quote. I can't imagine, like, that. I've heard this before in a couple other cases. It's just creepy. And I don't know. So Ernest, he would later report that he thought that Patricia may have gone to Chicago, Illinois. I'm not sure what he thought would be a reason why she'd go there. It never really became clear in any of the reporting that I could see. But like Corrie Anderson and Marquita Mull, Patricia, she was also a mother, leaving behind 2 children. In 1993, Patricia's brother Albert would actually get permission from and commission the cost of excavating the property that Patricia had previously shared with her husband Ernest. This property had been sold. The new owners were totally fine with them coming on and digging up the yard. They dug up the basement. They dug up the concrete floor in an addition that had been put in. And while they were unsuccessful with finding Patricia, District Attorney James P. Substack would say in an article in the Buffalo News that the publicity that Albert continued to garner with his search for Patricia was bringing new leads in their investigation. Unfortunately, there's never been any evidence of a crime, and without finding her remains, there's not much for police to go on with her disappearance. The search of the property in 1993 did end up recovering some bones, but they turned out to be animal bones, likely pig or cow, left over from a time when some butchering must have taken place on the property. They also found a bread wrapper from 1974, though, and that proved that the concrete floor of the basement had been poured sometime after that. Patricia, unfortunately, has, like I said, still never been found. There's been no further signs of what to go on with her. So if you have any information on the disappearance of Patricia Laemmerhirt, please reach out to New York State Police of Fredonia at 716-679-1549. And we'll end with the story that we started with, Corrie Anderson. Corrie's mom, Vicky, is still searching for answers, and she would tell the Post-Journal in 2021, quote, I guess my biggest thing is closure. I would like to know that. I'm to the point I just want there to be closure for all of us. I know whether she's still here someplace or not, she's with the Lord. I have a very strong faith, and that's helped me, end quote. Jeremy Smith, the lead investigator in Corrie's case, is also very invested in finding answers to what happened to her. It's a case that he's been involved with from the very start, and he wants to see it through. He urged anyone with information regarding Corrie's case, even if it might seem small, to call New York State Police at 716-665-3114. At the time of Corrie's disappearance, she had chin-length blonde hair. She has green eyes, is 5'11", and weighed about 170 pounds. She was last seen wearing wire-rimmed glasses, black corduroy pants, and a black leather jacket. I mentioned when I started researching this case that I came across more names of people that I want to get their story out there. That's the one thing I was a little bit worried, actually, and I think I mentioned this on the first episode of this show over a year ago, that someone had asked me if I thought doing a podcast just focused on New York State would be kind of limiting in the content, and I can't keep up. Like, there's so many stories that I want to tell. There's so many. It's not just true crime. There's cryptids, there's paranormal, there's history, and I love it. Like, it makes me sad. Like, the true crime stuff makes me very sad. The history stuff sometimes makes me very, very sad. But it has just been so enjoyable at the same time, being able to put the stories out there, to have the community continue to grow, I've had a couple families reach out to me now that have heard a coverage of an episode that I have done and thanked me for, covering and getting the word out about their loved ones. So I think I say it at the end of every episode. I'm just so humbled with the direction that this show has taken, and I can't wait to continue to see it forward. And I have some ideas of different things I want to do, and I'm just looking forward to continuing on this journey. So if you haven't already, to kind of segue into this, if you haven't already, please make sure that you are following the show on your podcast platform of choice. You can follow us on social media. I'm really the most active on the Facebook page, but we're also on Instagram and X. We have a YouTube channel. There's some things I'm considering doing with that. You can find all the source material. There were a ton with this episode on our webpage. It's linked in the show notes, but it's nydarksidepodcast.com. And if you want to get in contact with me, you can always email me at nydarksidepodcast@gmail.com. I hope you have a great week ahead. I have some different ideas for the next episode that I have started, but I'm really leaning towards doing a history episode to kind of break it up. So I hope you will check it out there. I actually researched it a while ago. My dad and I had the opportunity to go actually to the site of it and check it out. I got some pictures from that. So I hope you will check that out. I didn't even know it was there. It was a little gem hidden in Camillus, New York, just outside of Syracuse. So I hope you will check that out as well. And I hope everyone has a great week ahead, and I hope you stay curious. Bye.